Hey guys, tonight let's talk about the Book of Abraham. Let's give a little background on it. So, in the early 1800s, Joseph Smith's time in Nauvoo, a mummy display came through from Egypt, and it contained 6 mummies and papyrus scrolls. Members of the LDS church saw this display and they thought, our prophet can translate this. So the LDS church purchased the display, and Joseph Smith began translating. He wrote each symbol down from like an Egyptian hieroglyphic, and he translated into what he believed it said was a sentence, into sentences. And it basically was, he translated it to be the story of creation from, he claimed, Abraham's own hand. Basically a rewrite of Genesis. So he claimed that this original papyri, that Abraham from the Bible wrote it all down, and it was a creation story. So he started translating it. And in that papyri, there was a charm or a coin, a picture that now we know it goes behind a dead person's head. In ancient Egypt, when they would embalm and get ready to put a dead person into their casket to bury them, they would put this charm, they would place it behind their head in the casket, basically to send them off into the afterlife. And he saw this, and what Joseph Smith translated it to be, he interpreted it to be the universe and God in the center and the star Kolob that God lives by. Even though this is a charm that we now know the Egyptians used to bury dead people with. So if you've ever heard of the star Kolob within Mormonism, this is what it stems back to. So getting back to the subject, this is extremely interesting. In November of 1967, when discovered, the Egyptian papyri was given back by the Metropolitan Museum to the Mormon Church. The Mormons thought that the original papyri had been destroyed in the Chicago fire, but it hadn't, and it resurfaced in the museum. So Emma Smith's denomination of Mormonism, which is called the Community of Christ, the Utah Church, which is the reorganized Mormon Church, they bought the documents and they printed them in full color in the 1960s. This made Mormons so excited because they thought, wow, we finally have a piece of history. We finally have something that can prove the validity of Joseph Smith's translating abilities. And so this papyri was written in the Egyptian language, and this would prove that if Joseph Smith's translation of the papyri was correct, it would be possible that he could have translated the Book of Mormon from Reformed Egyptian, which is what they claim, even though that language has never been heard of or recorded ever. But problems began to surface very soon after the first presidency had been given the papyri. They gave it to the LDS professor Hugh Nibley of Brigham Young University to translate. Or they asked him to find a translator capable of doing so. And I'm curious why the current prophet of the church couldn't translate it, but that's a side note. So, if this papyri had been written by Abraham's own hand, like it claims, and what Joseph Smith said it should be at least 4,000 years old. If it's going to date back to Bible times when Abraham lived, it would be 4,000 years old. But after it was evaluated, even Professor Nibley of BYU had to agree that it was a production no older than the 1st century AD, not even close to Abraham's time. Abraham absolutely could not have written this by his own hand. So that's the first problem. Then there was a second problem. So the papyri were given to several qualified Egyptologists, and they were clearly shown to not be what Joseph Smith had said the Book of Abraham was. Expectations from the LDS members were super, super high, and this is really interesting. Dr. Sidney B. Sperry, one of the most noted LDS scholars, said, and I quote, The little volume of scripture known as the Book of Abraham will someday be recognized as one of the most remarkable documents in existence. It is evident that writings of Abraham while he was in Egypt, of which our printed Book of Abraham is a copy, must of necessity be older than the original text of Genesis. You can find this in Mormonism, Shadow or Reality, page 294. And it was quoted by Dr. Sidney B. Sperry. Ancient records testify in papyrus and stone, printed in 1938, page 83. So now that the papyri had been located and proven by the leaders of the church and the scholars to be the very one that Joseph Smith had translated from, the question was, do they read the same as what the translation said, Joseph Smith's translation said? Very quickly, it was discovered to be nothing more than pagan burial records titled the Book of Breathings, which is a short portion of the Book of the Dead. Egyptologist James Henry Breasted explains that the Book of the Dead is chiefly a book of magical charms. It was written by a very superstitious people and is quite different from the religion taught in the Bible. So many Mormon writers have admitted that this is the case. At this point, it can't be denied. There's evidence all over the internet. Look it up, look into it, and study for yourself. The Book of Abraham and the Book of Breathings from the Book of the Dead, they are not the same. It was a complete and total fraud. It was a complete mistranslation. The Book of Abraham it's basically a rewrite of the creation story of Genesis, and so much of it came from Joseph Smith's findings or his own imagination. And let's just say also that, this should be obvious at this point because it was a pagan burial rituals book, but there's not one single mention of Abraham, not his name, nothing to do with his faith, and just nothing to do with Abraham whatsoever. And yet it was claimed that it was written by Abraham's own hand. So that's a huge deal. And another note to consider here is that the LDS doctrine on the blacks in the priesthood, which is a huge, huge issue that is brought up today, just with former teachings, and I know it's changed and everything. It's an ever-changing religion, but the blacks and the priesthood doctrine was based on the Book of Abraham, so that's quite interesting. So basically, I wanted to make this video for those of you who hadn't heard it. The Book of Abraham is a complete and utter fraud. It is not at all the translation from the Papyri. Joseph Smith, in fact, it's quite interesting to note that sects of the Mormon religion, the different churches, they've thrown it totally out of their scripture, and yet the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints still keeps the Book of Abraham and the Pearl of Great Price as part of their canonized scripture, and they still teach it as scripture, which is incredible to me, even though it's completely proven false. And what bothers me is you go on LDS.org and you look up the Book of Abraham, and in a very long, wordy, lengthy explanation, LDS.org tries to explain it away or say, oh, the papyri might be a copy of a copy of a copy. No, look it up for yourselves. LDS.org is completely lying. And even if you're going to go the route that it's a copy of a copy, who cares? Because whatever's on the papyri is not what is in the Book of Abraham. Let me expand a little further on this. In the 1800s, we did not have the Rosetta Stone. The Egyptian language was a dead language. Joseph Smith basically had no one to check the accuracy or validity of his claims and his translation, because the Rosetta Stone was not in existence. So he thought, dead language, I'll translate it to what I say it is and everyone will believe me. Well, it's interesting because now in our lifetime, and actually for a long time since the 60s, we now know exactly what it says. We have the Rosetta Stone. We can translate ancient Egyptian. So this is one of the many, many issues within Mormonism, but this one needs to be exposed. And so I just hope that you research it more for yourself, look it up, look into this issue as well as many others. But for those of you who are in the LDS faith, or if you have left the LDS faith and you are searching, or if you are an atheist, or if you are an agnostic, I cannot end this video without telling you all that there is still hope. Just because you are raised in a religious system that is not true, it does not mean that there is not a God and that there is not truth out there. I am a born-again Christian. The Bible, test it historically, test it scientifically, test its claims, look up the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is hundreds and hundreds of copies that were discovered of original texts from the Bible, and it's word for word. It's just incredible, the accuracy. The Septuagint is another source. Look into it. If you want to test this out and find truth, I encourage you to do so. But don't be discouraged because you may have been in a false belief system, because there is still truth to be found. My purpose is to expose the fallacies of Mormonism, but also to reveal to you that there is still beauty and truth to be found in the gospel of Jesus Christ in the Bible. So feel free to comment below. Let's chat, and thank you so much for watching my video. Good night, guys.